Hello and welcome to Euronews Tonight. Let's take a look at the latest headlines. Fire without warning. Kazakhstan's President Tokayev orders security forces to use lethal force against protesters amid the ongoing unrest. NATO says it's closely following events in Kazakhstan as the French President Emmanuel Macron and the EU's Ursula von der Leyen call for an end to the violence. The Omicron wave expected to peak in France within 10 days as the UK deploys armed forces to help hospitals under severe strain.
Novak Djokovic speaks for the first time since his detention as the Serbian tennis player awaits a decision on his deportation from Australia.
And the world of cinema mourns the death of its iconic star, Sir Sidney Poitier, the first black actor to win an Oscar, breaking racial barriers in Hollywood. Hello and welcome to the programme. Kazakhstan's president has told police to shoot without warning as the crackdown on anti-government protests intensifies. Kassym-Jomart Tokayev accused 20,000 what he called bandits of rampaging through the largest city of Almaty. More troops from a Russian-backed security alliance have arrived to support the government. Demonstrations started several days ago, sparked by the rising cost of natural gas, but quickly turned into anti-government protests. Dozens have been killed, hundreds injured and thousands arrested. NATO Secretary-General says the military alliance and its allies are closely watching unfolding events in Kazakhstan.
We are concerned, we regret the loss of lives, and of course it is important that violence ends and that human rights are respected, including the right of peaceful demonstration and freedom of expression. And many allies have expressed this, and I expressed this as Secretary General of NATO.
Let's now take a closer look at the latest developments in Kazakhstan. Hermione G reports.
The president of Kazakhstan says he's authorized law enforcement to use lethal force against protesters who he called terrorist militants and bandits. 26 protesters and 18 policemen have been killed since Tuesday when the violent unrest began, sparked by a sharp rise in fuel prices. Some 3,000 people have been arrested, according to the country's interior ministry.
It's the law and order that are the main guarantees of the well-being of our country. And not only Kazakhstan, but also all civilized states. This does not mean an attack on civil rights and human freedoms. On the contrary, as the tragedy of Almaty and other cities of Kazakhstan has shown, it's the non-observance of laws, permissiveness and anarchy that lead to the violation of human rights.
Russian troops have been arriving in Kazakhstan since Wednesday night after Tokayev appealed to the Russian-led Collective Security Treaty Organization to send troops to help restore order. Kazakh authorities say the troops won't fight the protesters. Instead, they'll guard government institutions.
For more on this, let's head to London and Adam Hugg, the director at the Foreign Policy Centre. Thank you for joining us at Euronews.
Good evening, Rick.
The crackdown by President Tokayev on this unrest has been severe. Thousands arrested and dozens of people dead or hospitalized. So there have been crackdowns before, but have they been similar to this?
No, this is unprecedented in scale and scope. You've seen over the last decade or so a number of major economic protests in 2011, which is probably the closest comparator around the Zhernozem massacre. But since then, you've had a number of economic protests around quality of living, the cost of living issues, as more and more citizens have been unable to benefit from Kazakhstan's wealth, under a continuing kleptocratic elite that runs the country. But you've also seen smaller political protests that have been squashed very, very hard by the government before. Previously, the economic protests has been, in recent years, particularly the mothers' protests and other protests in 2019, ended up with the government resigning and in that case, former President Nazarbayev standing down. The government tried that playbook this time, but it continued to increase, and you've had obviously massive public and predominantly peaceful protests going on around the country. And then you've seen over the last few evenings more violent looting and rioting, the cause of which is unknown, and it is very difficult to speculate because the internet has been down, communications in and out of the country have been very, very difficult. So trying to identify what lay behind that, by the sounds of things, potentially quite organised looting and rioting that took place, and has taken the security situation away from the government and away from the peaceful protesters. That remains to be seen. But you've got a situation where the president is calling for the security forces to shoot people without warning. You've had a massive change inside the elite where former President Nazarbayev and his clan have been booted out effectively by all accounts. So there's real change going on both at a top level in Kazakhstan and on the ground.
Kazakhstan's economy is one of the strongest in the region. It's sitting on huge oil and mineral deposits. So how effective would it be if sanctions were imposed by the likes of the EU or the US on President Tokayev and or even Nazarbayev?
And ultimately, the Kazakh elite has millions and millions of pounds or euros or whichever currency you want in assets stashed around the world. There have been major reports by Chatham House and my own organisation, the Foreign Policy Centre, identifying some of the hubs for the Kazakh elite's international wealth. So use of Magnitsky sanctions, whether that's in the UK, EU or US, are an option to help put pressure on the elite and create some accountability for abuses that may be occurring at the moment. And I think that's something the international community has to look at very closely. I mean, obviously, I don't think anyone would be talking about wider society-wide economic sanctions, but I think there very clearly has to be accountability for some of the recent behaviour that we've seen over the last few evenings.
Adam Hug, thank you for your insights. As France officially takes over the EU presidency, Emmanuel Macron has pledged to boost Europe's strategic power in the region. At a meeting in Paris with the European Commission, President Macron said the bloc needed to focus on building its defence capacity. Maeve McMahon has more.
The so-called Brussels bubble is in Paris today. Dozens of Brussels-based reporters have come to the French capital, as well as the whole European Commission. They're meeting with the French President Emmanuel Macron, who will, of course, be in the spotlight on the European stage over the next 6 months as France has taken over the French presidency. Ursula von der Leyen used that press conference this morning between herself and Emmanuel Macron to flag the main issues that she wants to see him prioritise over the next 6 months, as well as, of course, the ongoing pandemic. She flagged, though, the Fit for 55 package presented by her colleague Frans Timmermans last July that hopes to see the continent of Europe reduce emissions by 55% by 2030. She also raised the issues like digital and also asylum and migration pacts, the one that was presented by her other colleague Ylva Johansson back in December, but still hasn't been translated into reality by EU member states. But what dominated that press conference today was the ongoing situation in Ukraine on the border of Russia, and also the anti-protest riots in Kazakhstan that began on the 2nd of January. But Emmanuel Macron's tone was very different to the one I've been hearing in Brussels all week. Most of the focus there being on the fact that the Europeans are excluded from the upcoming talks in Geneva between the Americans and the Russians. But Emmanuel Macron here today had a more pragmatic approach, saying that it's all about dialogue now with Russia. He's been on the phone to Vladimir Putin over the last couple of weeks and will be hosting calls as well in the next couple of weeks to find a solution to the situation. He said that Europe is a key partner for Russia because of its geography and, of course, its history, and it's important to keep the dialogue open. He also floated his defence summit that will be taking place this March and said that he hopes by then he will have concluded the architecture for the future of European security. Maeve McMahon, Euronews, Paris.
French health officials estimate that the peak of the current wave of coronavirus infections will hit in 10 days. On Wednesday, the country recorded more than 332,000 cases, the highest number seen since the start of the pandemic. There have been 204 new deaths recorded, taking the total COVID death tally to more than 125,000. President Emmanuel Macron has stood by recent strong remarks he made against those who remain unvaccinated, saying it was his responsibility to sound the alarm.
A time of year that is...
The army has been called in to help out London hospitals struggling with staff shortages due to COVID-19. The UK's Ministry of Defence said military medics would assist with patient care while other personnel will help fill in the gaps. Britain has recorded over 178,000 daily coronavirus cases and another 229 deaths. Well, for more on this, let's cross over to David Shazan in London. So, David, pressure on the NHS hospitals and services under severe strain. 2 more major incidents declared, and Health Minister Sajid Javid saying rocky few weeks ahead. How bad are things across the country then?
Well, Rue, they are pretty bad across the country, and at London hospitals, like the one just behind me, some 200 military personnel are being deployed to help staff because they're just so short. And across the country, there's another 1,800 Armed Forces personnel who are going to be giving support to beleaguered health workers. And we've just heard this afternoon that something like 8 to 9% of hospital staff are now either off sick or isolating. And so this means that 1 in 8 hospitals across the country have declared what they call critical incidents. That means that they're struggling to provide priority services and emergency services, and they've been forced to cancel surgeries considered non-urgent. Well, they may be non-urgent for health officials, but for the patients concerned, people waiting for hip replacements or other operations, they certainly are vital. So in short, this is a big problem.
Can Boris Johnson afford to stay on the path he's on, not bringing in any more restrictions?
Yeah, well, not only is he not bringing in any more restrictions, but he's actually loosened the restrictions that were already in place. Although when he announced that 2 days ago, he did also acknowledge that the National Health Service could feel overwhelmed in the coming days and weeks. Now, he's taking a gamble that health services can hold up, because if things get any worse, he's going to come under enormous public pressure to do something about it. But at the same time, large numbers of his own members of Parliament strongly oppose the introduction of any new restrictions, and just last month he faced a huge parliamentary rebellion from members of Parliament from his own party when he tried to introduce COVID passes for large public venues. Now, there are some indications that the number of new cases is levelling off. It certainly looks that way in London at the moment, although the new epicentre is in the north of England. Cases are still increasing very quickly there, but Boris Johnson will be hoping that it is confirmed in the coming days and weeks that the number of new infections is plateauing. Otherwise, he's going to face a real problem, and there's going to be just mounting pressure on him to take action to try to stem the epidemic. But doctors are saying it's almost too late for any new restrictions at this point. If that was the path he was going to choose, he probably should have done it several weeks ago.
David Shazan, thanks for that update. The world #1 male tennis player Novak Djokovic has spoken for the first time since being detained in Australia. Djokovic is waiting to challenge the decision to deny him entry to the country under strict COVID-19 regulations. Let's head over to Matthew in the Cube for more.
This was the message posted on Instagram by Novak Djokovic, the Serbian tennis player, saying thank you to the people around the world for your continuous support. I can feel it, and it is greatly appreciated. But Djokovic here providing no further details about his condition or his situation, as on Orthodox Christmas, he continues to remain at a Melbourne immigration detention hotel. Let's just rewind though. The 33-year-old was denied entry by Australian border authorities on Wednesday. Under the country's strict COVID-19 rules, anyone trying to enter Australia must have had 2 doses of a COVID-19 jab or a genuine medical exemption. Djokovic has previously voiced his opposition to vaccines and has not said whether he had a vaccine. However, he was initially granted an undisclosed exemption by 2 authorities. But upon landing in Australia, he was told by border authorities that he had failed to provide the appropriate evidence. And he has since been confined, his visa cancelled, and he is awaiting a court decision on his deportation. Unsurprisingly, this situation has gone down poorly on his native Serbia, with even the country's president, Aleksandar Vučić, getting involved online. But at the same time, in Australia, you have rumours that this is a political situation, with Scott Morrison, the Prime Minister, who is seeking re-election in March, initially having no issue with Djokovic's exemption, but then later praising border authorities for denying him entry, saying on Twitter that no one is above the rules. But Rue, as Djokovic now awaits this hotel deportation court decision on Monday, he is not alone, as we also have 2 other medical exemptions that are being investigated, including a Czech tennis player, Renata Verachova.
Thank you, Matthew. Well, for more on this, let's cross over to Michael Kern in London. So, Michael, only 10 days to go till the first Grand Slam of the season, and no one is talking about the tennis. So how quickly does the Australian Open need this to be sorted?
Incredibly quickly. As Matthew just said, of course, Novak is waiting on the court decision. The federal court hearing is in Melbourne, is on Monday. And here, Novak's legal team are obviously busy working on that. They've also discovered that it's emerged that there are 3 other players that have been admitted to the country using that same exemption already. And of course, as we mentioned as well, a couple of other players as well. Renata Verachova, of course, involved in this one as well. But no one's talking about the tennis. You know, everyone's talking about this, and it's a very contentious issue because we know that Australia has had one of the tightest and strictest lockdowns during the COVID period. So if you're someone that lives in Australia and you've not been able to travel between states, you've not been able to see family, and then you see an international sports star come into your country and being allowed to have a little bit of an exemption from those rules, that's going to create a little bit of animosity towards that. But as you can kind of see, there's a lot of support for Novak as well from lots of his fans outside that quarantine hotel where he is at the moment.
And how about the other players who are preparing for the tournament? How have they reacted?
So Rafael Nadal has come out today and he's effectively backed up, saying, look, it's normal for people in Australia to be frustrated because of what they've gone through. Nick Kyrgios has come out and said that, the situation is being handled, looks really bad, and went on to say that Novak's one of the greatest players to have. But at the end of the day, he's human. We must do better. And Marian Cilic also came out a little bit earlier on as well, saying that it's not a good look for the sport. And, with, like you said, with 10 days to go into the start to this first big Grand Slam of the year, all the eyes and all the conversation should be about the tennis, and about those players who are going to be participating for a fantastic sporting event.
So we have the French Open Grand Slam next, but other tournaments in between. Vaccine status looking likely to be a requirement for entry to most countries. How is this going to affect the tour?
Well, I think, like you just said, different countries are, of course, going to have different restrictions to go in and out. Positive news from a Djokovic point of view from France, of course, say that next Open is in May. And France's sports minister has said that he would be able to compete at Roland Garros this year without having had the vaccine. So obviously, as you go to different competitions, we saw Wimbledon last year. There were different requirements to come into the United Kingdom. But hopefully, as we get towards May and June, you never know what's going to happen with COVID-19. We know, fingers crossed, that we're going to kind of see COVID slowly disappearing, which would be lovely for the whole world. But I think as we go to different countries, it's going to depend on the status of COVID in their countries. And again, as we've said, the next one is in May. A little bit of time to go to that yet, but at the moment it looks like France sports minister saying that you wouldn't need a vaccine to be able to compete at the French Open.
Thanks, Michael. The world of entertainment is mourning the passing of Hollywood legend and groundbreaking actor Sidney Poitier, who has died at the age of 94. Poitier made history by becoming the first black man to win a Best Actor Academy Award for his role in the 1963 film Lilies of the Field. But he also made his name behind the camera, directing 9 films, as well as starring in over 50 movies. In 2002, Poitier made an honorary Oscar for what the Academy called his remarkable accomplishment as an artist and as a human being.
For me, it was how the character fashioned from this extraordinary life, whether it complemented the dimensions of this phenomenon we know as Nelson Mandela, how close it came to reflecting the essence of the man. That was the only consideration for me.
The Italian city of Venice is tackling its mass tourism issue by introducing quotas and imposing fees on visitors, as Richard Cady reports.
In an attempt to reduce mass tourism, Venice officials have introduced a limit on the number of people allowed into the city of canals.
I think that this will help to protect the city of Venice. Floods of tourists cannot come.
Visitors will also have to pay a daily €5 fee in order to access its historical centre.
The aim is to discourage one-day tourism, hit-and-run tourism, arriving in one day and leaving on the same day, tiring and stressing the city and encouraging slower tourism instead.
Police will be able to establish the identity of people in real time, thanks to data from their mobile phones. 500 cameras will be monitoring the flow of visitors, constantly broadcasting images from the streets in search for stray tourists.
If I enter the data in the aggregated anonymous form, we can see exactly who these people are. 977 foreigners, 800 Italians, 135 residents, and 139 commuters.
Previous data showed around 100,000 tourists were able to stroll through the city's squares every day. Local residents don't want this to happen again.
That's all from Euronews tonight, but do stay tuned for more news coming up.